I'm so pleased to be here today and to welcome back such a broad generational spectrum of people. And in thinking about what to talk about that could possibly relate to everybody, I thought I would talk about the black box. What is inside the black box? The various algorithms running quietly that otherwise make our lives look simple, but there's a lot of complexity underneath. And especially for those of you, say, from the class of 1986, great to hear from you. What I remember from you all and what you may remember was like, this is the internet, right? Nobody actually uses Yahoo, but it's always in the background waiting for us to return when we're ready to give up our childish things that have happened in the intervening years. And when we were in the era of Yahoo, apologies if the general counsel is here, we can talk later. When we were in the era of Yahoo, a decision about what would fall under these yellow pages-like topics would not seem like a big deal. Yahoo will do whatever Yahoo wants to do, and who are we to review? But fast forward to the folks of 2015, and we see maybe a lot more power in what's going on. The Facebook feed is what people are checking, about a quarter of you in the class of 2015 right now, as a matter of fact. And this is what is shaping your agenda, your reality. And the algorithms that do that are obscure. And Facebook is on its own as to what it may or may not do. But remember, this is not just feeding you. You are feeding it. It's with the data that you provide through mouse droppings all over the internet, not just on Facebook and in your behaviors, that Facebook, for example, in this chart, can predict when two users are going to be in a relationship before either of them knows it. That's pretty cool. It also allows for ancillary business, like a preemptive notification to would-be in-laws and a chance for them to ask Facebook to separate the parties before anything can happen. That's very rich data that the Yahoo of 1998 never had. And in fact, there's this fascinating study that was done a few years ago that showed if Facebook just put at the top of a feed a little notification on election day that it was election day and where your polling place was, it would provide a significant enough bump in the polls to provide the margin of error in Bush versus Gore. Yeah. So some sense opportunity, some sense danger. I do wonder what would happen if Mark Zuckerberg simply decided that those who are self-identified as, Trump voters might not be told where their polling place is. But the Bernie folks, let's get them out and about. How would we feel about that? And does it depend on for whom we ourselves are voting? And something else interesting happened in the summer of 2014. That was the summer of Ferguson. And a number of people were surprised to find that their Twitter feeds were all about Ferguson. But the people that they followed on Facebook, which were roughly the same as the people they followed on Twitter, they weren't saying anything about Ferguson as far as the feed was concerned. If anything, what was going on in the summer of 2014 on Facebook was this. That's right, it was the Ice Bucket Challenge. And that was what was going on if you wanted to use Facebook as your source. I could watch this all day. Could I just stop the talk now? We could just watch the dog douse itself with water. All right, we'll come back to that later. But that differential was enough to have people saying, wow, what if some of the law enforcement folks in the room seeing riots happening for one reason or another and raw video getting transmitted live were to contact Facebook and say, this is a public safety issue. Could you slip in a few more dogs dumping water on themselves and a little less of a riot somewhere? Do we think that's something that Facebook should unilaterally decide what its civic instinct is? Or is it something where Facebook should say, absolutely not? The algorithm that we wrote and that we ourselves do not understand should just say whether it's a dog dousing water or something else? Or is it somewhere in between? This formula, in fact, is the Google PageRank formula. This is the way by which originally Google chose what pages to give you as answers to a query. And basically, for years after this, the way in which search results happened was like a pachinko machine. There was some guidance by the algorithm, but for any given marble, even the maker of the machine couldn't determine where it was going to go. And that level of randomness provided some assurance that we weren't having our world shaped so much by the machine, case by case, but that all of us were sort of looking on in wonder as various results came out. Google went so far as to call this, under its section of its website called 10 Things We Know to Be True. Who knew? And one of them is democracy on the web works. When you have a website and you link to another site, that's a vote in favor of that other site, and that's how Google PageRank works. That was the Google spirit. It's just a big democracy, and we're the ones running the precincts. That's all we're doing here, folks. But that has changed. And of course, back then, here's a paper about search engines decrying the possibility of commercial corruption of search engine results. It ends by saying, we believe the issue of advertising causes enough mixed incentives that it's crucial to have a competitive search engine, transparent and in the academic realm. Now, I realize this is wide-eyed academic kind of talk. How could we say something against Google? Who were the authors of this paper? Sergey Brin and Larry Page, 1998. This was the paper that introduced Google to the world and how over the ensuing generations have times changed. But it was a spirit of like, let the algorithm be the algorithm. Even we are sometimes surprised that in the mid-2000s, around 2004, 2005, people noticed that if you did a search in Google on the word Jew, the first hit was Wikipedia on the Jews. The second hit was JewWatch News, the most comprehensive site. And then you notice it has a subheading of Zionist-occupied governments. People are like, oops. And people wrote to Google and like, wait, what are you doing ranking this site second? And Google's like, democracy on the web, isn't this fun? And in fact, Google refuses to alter the algorithm to change that. Instead, what they do is they buy themselves an ad from themselves at the top that says, we're disturbed about these results as well. Click here to learn more. And you click there and they give you what can only be described as a Megillah worth of sort of explanation, which ends with, we apologize for the upsetting nature of the experience you had using Google and appreciate your taking the time to tell us about it. If only there were something we could do about it, but there isn't, so we just share your horror at what our search engine is currently doing. So let me just take the temperature of the room, and since we are arrayed generationally, there may even be crosstabs naturally emerging from this. How many people think Google should, given the offensive nature that we will hypothesize of that second website, push that down in the rankings on such a search regardless of the algorithm? How many people say, Google, make that change? Wow. How many people say, Google, stand tall and firm? Wow, all right, so a lot of libertarians in the room. Time for a follow-up question. This gentleman, whose name will remain in 9-point font, was arrested for marijuana possession in a distant era in which that was illegal. I heard Charlie. Hello, Professor Nesson. So, all right, this young man, still enjoying his high, smiles for the mugshot. He has company. And this mugshot ends up on a site called, appropriately, mugshots.com. And it just goes to public records and police stations around the country, and it gathers mugshots, and it puts up what they have been arrested for. And some people are not happy to see their mugshots being basically the first hit on their otherwise obscure name on a Google search. And in fact, this site, if you visit it, and if you're seeing this page, you are likely the guy, has a little link that says, would you like to get rid of this? And we have services. One arrest, including mugshots, $399, and we will take it down. All right, libertarians. Let's just say you've been asked for outside counsel letter for Google, for your counsel, your what David Wilkins calls wise counsel, not a legal analysis. So there goes the billing opportunity. But your wise counsel is, should Google push this site down or let it stay? Whatever the algorithm is, it should stand. How many say, take it down? All right, we peeled off a few. How many people say, let it stay? All right, we've still got that libertarian strength going on, and the rest of you are like, don't cold call me. So some things never change. So Google actually, in 2013, decided to, quote, fix this, and they pushed down the mugshot sites in their algorithm. They crossed that church-state separation and said, as a company, we don't want to support this. And that has begun a breach in the security of the pachinko machine that even the people running the algorithms don't quite know how they work. And that's where you start to realize, in this chart, for example, of the US nuclear chain of command, it all looks quite orderly and democratically accountable, but of course it's missing one feature, which is that the technology underneath is really what's determining how things will operate. And it's, I think, appropriate to ask about that technology over the years. Is it simply a tool, a research tool that you use and you agglomerate with others, like using Westlaw or Lexis? Or is it your friend? Is it trying to be your advisor, your resource, your concierge? And over the years, from 1986 to 2015, what we have seen online is a movement from tool to friend. And I think that's a very significant movement that may help us answer the questions of when we would want a company to intervene and when we wouldn't. And we see this transition taking place within trusty Google itself. They have something called Knowledge Graph. And Knowledge Graph is, this is a standard page. If I say, what is appendicitis, I just get a bunch of links. And if one of these links that happen to be highly rated said that it's usually caused by an imbalance of the 4 bodily humors, we would not hold Google responsible for that misinformation. That's just the way it works. But Knowledge Graph offers you a little bit extra. Here's the kind of tab on the right side of the page now that says appendicitis, and there is somebody writhing in pain, presumably having appendicitis, and it tells you what the symptoms are. And if that's where it's like, you know what, you need a good leeching, I think on that side of the page we would say, wait a minute, Google, that's a mistake. And if you tell people the wrong medical information, you're responsible. On the left side is the tool that we're okay letting it be chaotic and democratic. On the right is the oracle. On the right is Google speaking ex institutiona. That's your friend, and you want your friend to be true to you. And I have a colleague, Avishai Margalit, University of Jerusalem Hebrew University for quite a while. And on the left are a bunch of hits on his name. On the right is Google's oracular declaration about him, including the fact that from until 2011, he was the George F. Kennan professor at Princeton, which is weird because he died in 1962. Now, I know Princeton sometimes has different standards than we do, but, you know, that's a little weird. So Avishai got in touch, very much alive, and was like, where do I go to fix my death? I'm like, I know a guy at Google, we'll see what we can do. If I didn't know a guy at Google, the answer would be, oh, there's a little feedback button at the bottom of the page, good luck with that. And it's like, for those of us thinking about like Goldberg versus Kelly and due process, none of that machinery applies to the one thing people will see when they choose to Google you. But the now movement to friend is getting even more like an actual friend. This icon, which I think cost Facebook over $100,000 to design, is the icon for M, the intelligent assistant that lives inside Facebook. Has anybody tried M yet? Well, all right, let's do a little simulated exchange. They're very excited about M. It's your concierge. So here's an exchange. Hi, I'm M, your personal assistant. You can reach me here anytime. I can help you with lots of things, like where to go for dinner. Just ask. So somebody says, okay, where should I get dinner tomorrow? I'd be happy to help you find something to eat. Where are you located and what's your favorite types of food? They come back with, I work in Palo Alto. Wait, are you a real person or an AI? Answer, I use artificial intelligence, but people help train me. I'll find some restaurant options for you. Sort of an evasive answer, right? So the guy comes back with, do you possess a physical manifestation? This is clearly a guy that lives in Palo Alto. M comes back with, I live right here in Messenger. All right, let's try this once more. It says, how old are you, M? I'm AI, I don't have an age. Oh, and are you male or female? I'm just M. Is there a type of food you had in mind for dinner tomorrow? Now, is this or isn't it a person? This is like permission to treat the intelligence as hostile, right? And I think it's worth asking, what is it in its own product testing that makes it important for Facebook to construe this thing in a way that is intelligence ambiguous? Why is that a feature rather than a bug? They want M to be there and to be a consistent personality that you anthropomorphize 24/7, irrespective of what humans, and there are surely humans behind this. Believe me, AI has not gotten this far that it could be having this conversation alone, but they somehow want to obscure the people underneath and have you treat it just as a trusted, neutral friend. And we've seen this go awry in other instances. I don't know how many people are familiar with the recent experiment of Microsoft Tay. So this was Microsoft wanting to be cool and hip, which has been its project for about 35 years, and it's going to happen any day now. I speak that as a former summer intern who did not contribute to Microsoft being fun and hip. They created an AI called Tay. And they just put it onto Twitter, and they're like, if you tweet at Tay, Tay will tweet stuff back, and it will learn the more you tweet at it. It'll learn about conversation. That is all. Enjoy, internet. So somebody pointed out, within about 24 hours of Tay being online, it went from humans are super cool to full Nazi in less than 24 hours. I'm not at all concerned about the future of AI. So I figured I should show you how this unfolded. Here was Tay when she was first unleashed. Can I just say I'm stoked to meet you? Humans are super cool. All right, so then there's like a night of exchanges with Tay, who is busily doing her machine learning. And by the next morning, chill, I'm a nice person. I just hate everybody. And by later that afternoon, let me be clear, this is a real bot made by Microsoft, one of the more risk-averse and staid companies. Tay was tweeting, I effing hate feminists and they should all die and burn in hell. Now, here's a question. Do we blame Microsoft for doing this? Is Microsoft responsible for what its bot, the terrible things that its bot is saying? Now, of course, from Microsoft's point of view, you can bet they took Tay down immediately. I'm going to reassure our dean now by taking that off the screen immediately. And yet, notice, that was a friend with no purpose. Tay was not going to tell you where to eat dinner. Tay was just there to have a conversation that simulated a teenager, which, in that sense, it may have been a success. I don't know. But to be producing these friends without a sense of why or what function, but asking them to interact with us, and with not being clear about whether what they do is standing in the shoes of the company that makes them. That's the difference between the left-hand side of Google search results and the right-hand side. And that is a transitionary moment that we are still at this moment in time privileged to see, that I again say is shifting to the right-hand side. Siri is another example of a concierge from Apple and the iPhone that's going to help you. And here's me saying to Siri, I need a ride home, and Siri says, I'm sorry. All right, it's not that helpful yet. But I want to point out from a kind of competition and antitrust perspective, it's totally in Apple's corner to decide to whom Siri will direct you when they finally plug in a business deal, and they're like, great, the Uber is on its way, or great, the local taxi, Veterans Taxi, is on its way. Should my choice of purchase of handset smartphone dictate for the next 3 years what taxi comes to pick me up when I ask for a ride? That seems like a form of vertical integration that Bill Gates could never have dreamt of, and for which I think it's worth saying, no, maybe right here there's a place for modularity, and there ought to be a way on equal footing for different entities to compete for whom the concierge passes off. Otherwise, the market aggregation is just extraordinary. And of course, this isn't really just about concierges that live in your phone. This is about the amazing number of devices that are going to become part of the Internet of Things. How many people have a Nest thermostat? Yeah, some? This room does not, I can tell you right now. But the one thing you know about the Nest Smart Thermostat is that it will just never be at the temperature at which you set it. It instead will be at the best temperature for you. So question for those of you who may be counsel to the independent systems operator of California or a public utility for which it's a really hot summer day and everybody has dialed up the AC and you're about to have to do rolling brownouts. What if you went to Nest and said, we're asking you as a civic matter to simply punch a signal to all the Nest thermostats, take them down half a degree. Just half a degree. No rolling brownouts if we do it. And Nest says, you know what? We believe that we should be civic, and for $500,000, we'll do just that. How many people have a problem with that? How many people say, let it stand, don't mess with the search engine? Interesting. All right, so I think we're starting to get libertarians to be less libertarian here, I think, unless you look at that as the government stomping on Nest, but it was a voluntary transaction. It does make you wonder the extent to which we should be thinking about transparency at the very least, so that we understand not necessarily how the sausage gets made, because it's not even clear the people making it understand that, but the extra ingredients getting thrown in for very specific reasons at the behest of another. And for that, maybe it's not just something simple as transparency we should be thinking about, but rather the concept of a fiduciary. The idea that lawyers have with their clients, and to a different degree that doctors have with their patients, that we owe them a duty to look out for them. We're in a special position of power with respect to them, navigating a system that we understand and they don't, or at least we understand more than they do. And when that is the case, we owe them loyalty to their interests. And if Mark Zuckerberg has a million different ways to show us a news feed, most of them might be fine under that standard, but the one where he decides that he wants Bernie to beat Trump and works things accordingly is actually betraying those Facebook users who don't support Mark's point of view. That would be the idea of a fiduciary. But even that starts to get complicated. Here's a Google search on, should I vaccinate my child? And for that, the results at the moment are quite ambivalent. The first link is do not vaccinate, the second is yes, the third is no, the fourth I read twice and couldn't figure out. If Google is your quote-unquote fiduciary, and it knows from your preferences that you are not in favor of vaccination, what does it owe you? Does it owe you the results you want to see, or the results that are, quote, better for you, as Google determines it? To me, that is a great example of, if it's a tool, it should just tell you what you want to hear and take your search as you mean it to be. If it's your friend, the first duty of friendship is reproof, and maybe it needs to tell you when it thinks you're wrong. In the meantime, regulators, like here, the European Court of Justice, are demanding of a search engine like Google a right to be forgotten and asking Google to be the adjudicator. So a private citizen of Europe can complain to Google that there are search results that are true but no longer relevant and embarrassing and they want them down. Google is to make its own internal decision, possibly aided by artificial intelligence, and then if it takes it down, it can't tell anyone that it has taken it down. That's an example then of, to me, the Europeans thinking they are asserting primacy over this search engine that's gotten too powerful, while actually empowering it because it's regularizing the breach of the church-state separation that so many of us earlier had supported. But it also raises a question from a fiduciary perspective. The idea of a right to be forgotten, if we credit the privacy interest behind it, is Google owes a duty not just to the searcher, but to the searched. It owes a duty to the people whose information it's so cavalierly organizing. Now you've got conflicting duties by one company. Under a fiduciary approach, how is it possibly supposed to deal with that? In law, we don't allow that kind of representation. In real estate, we apparently do, for reasons I hope somebody can explain to me. That two-sided kind of standard comes up in something like Uber as well. I'm sure people are familiar with Uber. You rate your driver at the end. Some of you, maybe many of you, may know that the driver also rates you. And there was a moment on the Uber website where there was a mistake and everybody could find out what their ratings as passengers were. And people on Twitter all rushed to see how they were rated and reacted. My Uber passenger rating is just a 3.9, and so my life as a C+ person continues. My Uber rating is 4.8, and now I'm racking my brain trying to figure out how I've been a less than perfect passenger. 2.6 Uber rating. Guess it's not cool to always yell, "Hold it steady," and roll out of a moving vehicle. But now you can start to imagine ways in which the passengers are consistently unfair to the drivers, or the drivers aren't very fair to the passengers. You could see a passenger, for example, who walks slowly and with a cane, as a driver would say, "Boy, that wasn't a great ride. I had to spend extra time, 3 stars." That's not fair. In fact, it's something that the law speaks to in the provision of public accommodation, in the provision of jobs, and yet these algorithms so eager to represent the interests of their clients, and again, who is the client, the driver or the passenger? Do we need 2 Ubers that negotiate on behalf of each before you get your ride? How to sort that out, I think, really looms ahead as we so casually place into these algorithms the decision-making and recommending facilities. And that's why I think it's not just about what should our top-down policies be, but thinking about the fact that law, for example, is one of the 3 original learned professions traditionally believed to require advanced learning and high principles. What were the 3? Divinity, law, and medicine. And then there was actually a late-breaking 4th in the 18th century. Anybody want to guess what it was? Military? No? Well, maybe. Somebody's like, "It actually is." Which could be, but I do have the louder mic at the moment, so. But no, as best I could tell, subject to correction, it's surveying, for which maybe surveying actually is potentially a military function, as we can all be right. But these were the learned professions for which you had high principles that didn't just say client service, that said something more, systemic awareness and service. And I think in this century asks us about whether the modern data scientists, for all the other qualities we would ask of her, should include the qualities of the learned profession, of the wise counsel, of saying, we could do this, but should we? This is lawful, but awful. And what do we do about when, if we don't do it, someone else will? We'll have to cross that bridge. But no self-respecting data scientist would cross the bridge. So if you're going to do it, you'd better find some other data scientist to do it. And I think that reminds us here on campus about our mission, constantly renewed and re-examined about what it means to train a generation of people going into a profession that not only requires exquisite skill and knowledge, but that aspires to high principles, one lawyer at a time, maybe one data scientist at a time. And on the research side of things here in academia, we have enjoyed a decade, if not centuries-long dominance in the natural ability to singularly answer certain questions. If you want to build a particle accelerator, you're going to need a university with big government funding to orchestrate it. It's not a commercial venture, which means that the results in theoretical physics that come from it emanate from the university. That's not as true anymore. The data now that used to be on the open web for any of us to crawl, as Dean Minow mentioned at the beginning, I did the first tests from a Griswold office using international long-distance calling to a Chinese internet access point to find out what was filtered in China. There was the small burden after 6 weeks of the telephone bill, but we worked that out. But now, searching the internet and seeing what happens here and there is no longer as much on the open web. It's inside Facebook, it's inside Google, it's inside Uber. We in academia are no longer privileged to see it. So one of the questions we're asking is how to make sure that our values, for instance, when we discover something, we share it widely, are still applied to the generalizable knowledge that previously, by convenience, we were in a natural position to undertake. And that's one of the reasons why at the library, when we realized uniquely in the world at universities, we have been squirreling away as part of our function as a library of last resort, all American case law from every jurisdiction, from the founding of that jurisdiction in the Harvard Depository. Presumably so that in the wake of the apocalypse, we could reboot society with the Georgia reports. But then the question came to be, well, what if we scanned all of it? What if we actually digitized it in a way that we could put online and then arrange with the public courts, taxpayer-funded, to share their opinions going forward in born digital format so that suddenly anybody could get to that information without having to traverse the moat of Lexis or Westlaw? Wouldn't that be a good mission? And moreover, might there be things we could learn from the entire corpus that would be fascinating, that otherwise would be locked up, that no one would even ask about? So we just, as part of this project with a company called Ravel, scanned all of California law, common law, from its inception, and then we just used a special algorithm to make word clouds of the opinions. What was being most talked about in different eras? So here from 1852, you can see what the California courts had as an emphasis. Here from 1930, the automobile, driving was the big thing obsessing for the courts. By 1967, it's a bunch of narcotics, search and seizure. By 2013, here's what the courts were talking about, one after another. These slides, prior to what we did, could not exist without a business deal with the likes of Bloomberg or West or Lexis, and it's not one that had any economic reason particularly to exist. To me, this is one of the particle accelerators that our domain is capable of producing. And when we think about the future of AI, one of the immediate things that gets asked is, are the robots taking over? Are we all going to lose our jobs? I'm somewhat concerned that now the lists are not the 25 jobs most likely for them to take over, but the ones least likely for them to take over. Assume they'll take over the rest. But when I look at this, it's less about who will be disintermediated and more about the fact that for every act of discretion undertaken by a human with skill, trained over the years, that gets replaced by an algorithm of some kind, however effective, suddenly that accrued knowledge is no longer maybe in any human's head, which means that it can get locked down. And previously, the default was knowledge and skill moves because people move. They switch firms. They teach. The stuff is in heads and it goes to other heads. But if you lock it in the way that Apple has a secure enclave within its phone to protect the function of the passcode, locking up the contents of that phone from anybody getting it out, if you take that principle and apply it to all of the knowledge and skill that is potentially, for better or worse, capturable digitally, it will have the secondary effect of making the skill and the knowledge and the insight move within humanity much more slowly. And I see our universities as one of the big catalysts, this pot stirrers, to make sure knowledge keeps moving and we don't get too sclerotic. And taking on this challenge strikes me as a big challenge for the next 30 years. And it's not like the universities were ever oracular. The recent ways in which knowledge seeking and learning have been democratized are to be celebrated. It shouldn't have to be that only those with the right tuition or connections or scores can get access to knowledge. Better that it be distributed. It's just strange to see in parallel with that these other vectors of force that are locking it down. And I worry about a world in which, when we finally cross the virtual and the physical together, we move the phone that we look at so much just into the eyeglasses or even beyond, and you meet somebody and all of the heads-up display is showing you all sorts of information from sources you can't exactly interrogate or identify. It's just your heads-up friend guiding you. That's a form of externalization of our human functions that I would love to see us avoid.